Hey yo, I'm Miss Linnea Lark, and I've been a high school art teacher for over a decade. Welcome to my channel where I make art and ceramic tutorials for my teenage baby birds. This lesson is for my ceramics kids, and it's their very first project of their year. Hooray! Alright, let's get down to business and make some pinch pots. Animal pinch pots. A pinch pot is an ancient form of hand-built pottery where the sculptor shapes and forms a ball of clay into a pot using their fingers to pierce and then pinch the clay into a hollow form. Pinch pots are usually on the small side as you'll be limited to a certain extent by the size and length of your hands and fingers. However, you can make very complex and large forms by attaching multiple pinch pots together. This pinch potting is a very natural and great place to begin your clay journey. And remember, pinch pot techniques can be used to create both functional and sculptural forms. So, before we begin pinching some pots, I've got 2 quick tips for all my whiny baby beginners. You know it's you. But here you go. Number 1, be patient with yourself. This is most likely your first real experience sculpting clay. Go easy. It's okay. You're gonna make mistakes. And you need to make as many mistakes as you can. I'm serious. The sooner you guys start failing, the sooner you'll stop looking at me like I'm a crazy person when I get hysterical about how uncareful you're being. The point is, you need to make mistakes and then figure out how to fix those mistakes. Figure out where you went wrong in the first place so that you can avoid making that same mistake again. And feel good about it. Remember, lots of failure means you're trying and growing. Growing in your sculpting skills, in your patience, and in your doggedness. All right, wisdom tip number 2 is you are the master of the clay. Clay is reactionary. It doesn't wait for you to leave the room and then re-sculpt itself or dry itself out like a Toy Story character. It's up to you to get to know it, understand it, and then treat it properly. For example, if you pinch your clay, it will squish. If you pinch it too hard, it'll end up cracking or even ripping. If you leave it out in the air, it will start to dry out and then crack. If you handle it too often and too roughly, it will wrinkle and then crack and eventually break. If you add too much water, it will get slimy and weak and eventually slump or even collapse. The sooner you take ownership of your mistakes, the sooner you'll realize that you have the power to improve, and then the greater your growth will be. And remember, you are the boss of the clay. Learn its properties and warning signs and then force it to your will. All right, let's get started. First, we gotta start with our ideas and do a good old-fashioned brainstorm. So you'll get yours out and start writing all your ideas. A proper brainstorm should have good and mediocre, if not bad, ideas on it. Sometimes to find a good idea, you have to go through some terrible ideas first. So don't feel self-conscious about what's written on your page. If you're not one of my students and you want to purchase this worksheet, I'll leave a link in the description and comments below, and you can go to my Teachers Paid Teachers site and buy one. I mean, how many people you know that need one of these worksheets? Can you hook me up? Maybe you know someone. I'm just saying, buy that worksheet. Once you've written out some animal ideas, you'll need to commit to one before moving forward. So you can see that I've settled on the whole body of a fly. I'll create its legs, wings, and eyes. You'll also want to consider the style of your animal pinch pot. List out some words to describe the vibe you want to create. Listing words to describe your style can help you sculpt a more intentional vibe. Compare the style differences between these 2 artists' color, shape, and line choices. What words would you use to describe both of them? Now that I have an idea of what I'll be creating, I hit Pinterest or Google to do some visual research. You'll need to collect 2 photographs of your animal, 2 illustrations of your animal, and 2 examples of different animal pinch pots. The pinch pot references don't have to be the same animal that you're making, but it might be helpful if you can find one to see what other people have created. On to your thumbnails. A thumbnail is a rough sketch of your design. You'll need to do a minimum of 3 thumbnails in 2 different views. Drawing the front and side view of your pot will help you be sure that you have the best possible design. Make sure it's balanced and that it flows on all sides. This is 3D art, people. Gotta make sure it looks interesting from every side. While making your thumbnails, make sure you have your references available. They'll help you with your drawing proportions, style, and even help give you execution ideas. Just be careful. You don't want to outright copy one reference. Try to use ideas from each reference as well as your own imagination. Ain't nobody like a copycat. Each thumbnail should be a little bit different. Try starting with a different pot shape, making body parts larger or smaller, or even try a different style. Commit to a minimum of 3 thumbnails. Even if you love your first one, put your heart into all 3 designs. Okay, now that I have a rough idea of my pinch pot's design, I begin by making the actual pinch pot. I start out with a ball of clay that's roughly the same size as my thumb. I slap my clay into a ball by cupping my hand. If you have too much clay, pinch some off and save it for later. But keep slapping your clay ball until it looks roughly round. Make sure you squish away any clay seams, like this little groove here. Clay has a memory, and if you leave seams, those seams will become rips and cracks a little later. So wipe away any lines all the way around. Let's open this pot up. Use your thumb to gently pierce the middle of your clay ball. See my slight indentation? We will keep piercing and going deeper and deeper and rotating the pot little by little. We go slow for 3 reasons. Reason number 1, if you go fast, you might go too far piercing the pot all the way through. No bueno. If you go straight through without rotating your thumb, it will get suctioned inside, making it difficult for you to pull your thumb out without crushing your pot. And if you go too fast or far, you'll get cracks. Make sure you don't pinch all the way through, but don't leave a lot of heavy thick clay at the bottom either. A good thickness to aim for your clay at the base is to make it about as thick as your pinky finger's first knuckle, the littlest knuckle. It's about, I would say, a little less than ½ an inch. I like to keep my outside hand at the bottom so I can feel when I'm getting too close. Okay, now there's a hole through the middle of my pot. Yay! So, now I need to start pinching the clay walls into my desired shape. Notice I have not set my pot down yet. It's very important to keep the bottom round. If you set your pot down on its round bottom, that round bottom will turn into a flat bottom because of gravity and force and the fact that our clay is super wet. From this point, we will be battling gravity non-stop. Gravity will start to turn your round pot shape into a flat plate shape. So we want to keep our pots as narrow and as round as we can for now. So keep it cradled in your palm as we work. To pinch, I place my thumb all the way inside to the inside base and right at the inside corner. I start to pinch the extra thick clay at that bottom corner upward toward the rim of my pot. I pinch upward and then rotate my pot and pinch upward again. Keep rotating and pinching until you go all the way around. Notice how my pinch pot starts to look like a mushroom at the base. Before I start pinching, I do a visual sweep to check for any wrinkles that may have appeared. And all that pinching has caused wrinkles and cracks at my base, so I squish those away immediately. If you see wrinkles, use a dry or barely wet finger to squish those wrinkles and cracks away. We keep rotating and pinching closer and closer to the rim, being careful to catch any wrinkles or cracks as you gently pinch toward the rim. Try to pinch and rotate your pot consistently so your walls stay relatively even in thickness. If you pinch too much or too drastically, your walls will become inconsistent and your rim will start to resemble a mountain range. Notice how thin the clay is at the base compared to how thick the clay is still at the rim. We want to keep our rims relatively flat, so if yours starts to look rough, you can flip it over and give your rim a gentle pat on the tabletop to flatten it out. Wrinkles, cracks, and rips are totally normal. You are guaranteed to get them. Our job is to catch them fast and immediately smooth them away. That way they don't become a bigger problem later on. So I take the time to do a quick wrinkle check all over the pot. Now, if you guys are getting cracks that are pretty drastic, here's a good tip. As you can see on my rim, I've got quite a little rip. A little bit of pressure from my finger is not going to fix this crack, okay? So I rip it open a wee bit further and then overlap the two sides and then squish them into each other. I'm being very careful to get rid of any seams or any evidence that there was ever a crack. If you do not squish away the crack, it will return later. They always return if you don't take care of them properly. Okay, let's make sure those walls are even. Continue to pinch thick areas into thinner areas. If you have areas that are too thin, weak, or are cracking, as long as your clay is still rather wet and plastic, you can squish a little ball of clay into that area and give it reinforcement. Remember, clay has a memory and it will crack in these areas if you do not squish it away. Notice that I still haven't flattened the bottom of my pot. I want to keep it round as long as I can, and so I'm using eggshell foam to rest my pot's bottom on while I shape it. Gotta keep that bottom round. Depending on your design, you may or may not want to dart your rim to make your rim more narrow. You can dart your rim as a design choice. Maybe you like the look of it a bit better. Or you might need to dart your rim if you've totally lost your battle with gravity. I mean, I can't tell you, every year there's 2 or 3 kids in every class whose pinch pot turns into a straight up plate. If you notice that the circumference of your rim is getting wildly wider and wildly wider as you pinch, you need to do some surgery, and making a dart cut can really help you out. To dart your rim, make a vertical cut on your pot and overlap the two sides. Squish the two sides together firmly and then squish out the seams or lines that are left behind. You don't want to see those. Make as many darts as you like, but remember, clay can only be squished into each other like this if both areas being squished are still plastic, fresh out of the bag wet. It's time to shape our pots. I start with flattening the bottom. I hold the pot at the desired angle that I want my rim. Notice I could lean it toward myself or keep it straight up. If you want the mouth opening to face you, you can totally do that. If you want the opening to be level with the tabletop, like most pots, carefully level it by looking at it from different angles. Once it's where you want it, very gently tap the round base onto the tabletop. This will create a flat bottom. The harder you tap the pot down, the wider your base will become and the more shallow your pot will be. At this point, you can reshape your pot into an oval or a triangle shape just by pinching or reshaping your pinch pot with your fingers and hands. Mine is round, so I don't have much reshaping to do. The term setup means that you're allowing your pot to dry out. This will make your clay harder and drier. Make sure that your pot is in the exact desired shape before setting it up. You can clean it up later, no big deal. But if your walls are wonky, they will set up wonky and be harder to fix later. So get them in the right spot and then set them up. Once I get my desired shape, I set it outside to allow it to set up just a wee bit. Right now my walls are still so wet that they shift when I touch them. And that shifting causes those wrinkles, and those wrinkles turn to cracks. So I need to let my pot get a little bit harder, a little bit firmer before I move forward. While my pot is outside, I start building the body parts, and I started with the wings. So I roll out a slab and then start to draw a template for those wings. 10 minutes later, my alarm goes off and I check my pot. And while it's still a bit soft, the walls feel firm enough not to crack under a little pressure. So I head back inside and set aside my wing template and slab and start smoothing my pot's walls. To smoothen my walls, I'll need a rubber rib, a serrated metal rib, which has teeth. Because it has teeth, I've nicknamed it the alligator tool. So if I say alligator tool, I'm talking about this kidney-shaped metal teeth-laden rib. The comb is our quarantine substitute, and I have to say, it works almost as well and is crazy cheap. So not a bad alternative if you're on a budget. Imagine this drawing is an exploded view of my pot's walls. If you look at the walls of my pot, they are crazy bumpy from all of my pinching. We're going to sand away all the mini hills of the surface with the serrated rib. When using the alligator tool, it's a good idea to press pretty firmly. Don't destroy your pot or anything, but deeper scratches tend to work better. Also, make sure you regularly change the direction of your scraping to create a more even surface. I recommend that you don't hold your pot while you're doing this. Notice that I'm holding my pot, but I'm just doing that so that the camera can see what in the world I'm doing. But again, I don't recommend it for you. I recommend setting it on its bottom or top rim to scrape and take turns between the two. But if you feel the need to hold your pot while scraping or sculpting, use eggshell foam to create a soft support from beneath and a firm claw-like hold. By spreading out your fingers, you'll spread out the pressure from your grip and keep yourself from pressing too hard and cracking or warping your pot. But again, I do not recommend you hold your pot while using the alligator tool. Once you start using the alligator tool, if you notice that your walls are moving too much, you may need to set it back outside for a while. FYI, I prefer the metal rib tool to the comb because the metal rib can bend to the shape of the pot and the comb does not bend. So FYI, if it was me for my own studio, I would spend a little extra bit of money to get the metal rib. Once you've scraped away all the hills on your surface, use your rubber rib to smooth out the rough scraping texture. Look how smooth and even the pot looks after a few wipes of the rubber rib. FYI, I prefer the red soft rubber rib as it's easy to bend to the contour of the pot while smoothing, but the hard blue rib serves a good purpose as well, so try any kind of rib and see how you like it. Now that my pot has set up a bit, the clay isn't totally plastic or wet anymore. That means I cannot get away with simply squishing some wet clay on the cracks. I'll still use fresh clay to patch the crack, but because the pot is no longer wet, I'll need to do what's called slip and scoring. I use a needle tool to hatch some deep lines on the pot. That's called scoring. I then put on some slip or watered down liquid clay on top. The slip acts as a glue. I then grab a wee pinch of wet clay, score it, and then wrap it around the crack. This next part is super important. I'm gonna squish the excess clay from the patch onto the wall, but I make sure to score anywhere and everywhere that clay will squish. Don't skimp on scoring. I have a saying, the fire don't lie. You can tell me that you score, slip, score, but if your patched cracks fall off in the kiln, well, to that I say, the fire don't lie. Whatever you did, it wasn't good enough, so make sure you're scoring deep, adding plenty of slip, and scoring everywhere you squish the clay. The final step to smoothing is to use a sponge with as little water on it as possible to smooth away the walls. Don't use too much water or over rub. Too much water and too much friction can strip the top layer of the clay away, leaving only grog on the surface. Now that I've got my walls all cleaned up, I put my pot back outside for 10 more minutes. FYI, on this beautiful Californian day, it was 65 degrees Fahrenheit. If it's crazy hot where you are, check it every 5 minutes and rotate your pot every 5 minutes. On a crazy hot day, the side of the pot facing the sun will dry out and shrink faster, causing a wobbly pot, and oftentimes cracking. While I wait, I return to making my wing template on paper. Once I get a silhouette I like, I cut it out and then trace it twice onto the clay, making 2 wings. After 10 minutes, I go check on my pot and rotate it and decide to give it about 5 more minutes. I'm trying to get the clay to a soft leather hard stage, and it's still a little bit on the wet side. Soft leather hard is a nice stage. It's basically when the clay is still a little bit bendy. You can bend it without it cracking, but it's not so wet that when you touch it, you leave a fingerprint behind. It means it's sturdy, but still soft. That's kind of where I'm trying to get my pot to. I cut my wings out and bag the excess clay and then collect my pinch pot from outside. Now that my pot is set up to a soft or wet leather hard, I do some final smoothing with my soft red rubber rib. I clean the clay off my rib after every pass or two by scraping it on my hand. If you leave hard clay on the rib, the hard clay chips will scratch your pot. Now that my pot's pretty hard, it's time to even out the rim. Yours might look better or worse than mine. You might want to straighten your rim or cut it at a special angle. Either way, here's what you'll do. First, I find the lowest side of the rim. With a firm hand, I line up my needle tool to the area I want to make a cut. And just very gently, I turn my wheel around, keeping my needle tool level and steady, scratching a flat line across the edge. I'm very careful not to allow it to move up and down while I spin my pot around on the banding wheel. Once I've drawn the line with the needle tool, I use a blade to cut the rim. I don't go all the way through on the first pass, and I'm careful not to force it through. The clay is harder now, and so it will take me a few gentle passes with the blade to cut all the way through. And then I use my sponge and a serrated trimming tool to round out my rim. This pinched pot is looking pretty fly. Time to add the body parts. I make 2 even clay balls and then slam those down to create the eyes. I smooth them with a rib and then score them onto my pot. Remember, wet clay and hard clay cannot be just simply squished together. You must score. Remember to score everywhere that you will squish that wet clay. When attaching large, thick pieces like these eyes, I first apply pressure in the middle and then spiral the pressure outward toward the edges. This will help squish all the air bubbles out. Air bubbles can cause all kinds of cracks, dents, and explosions in the kiln. I use a paintbrush to smooth away the excess slip that's squished out from behind the eyes, and then I seal the eye's outer rim with the side of my fingernail. Then, because my eyes are so thick, I hollow them out from the inside, burrowing a shallow cave in the back. Thick clay takes longer to dry and can remain moist even when your pot appears to be dry. When moisture heats up in the kiln, it evaporates at a fast speed, and if there's a lot of moisture and the temperature in the kiln ramps up too fast for the moisture to evaporate, it will explode out. Bummer! So the rule of thumb for our firings is to keep the clay thinner than your thumb. I hollow and smooth it, and then I'm onto my wings. Once I smooth out my wings, I try them around on my pot, positioning them in different places so that I know where I want them to go. Once I know where I'll attach them, I add some quick line details with a wooden tool, clean them up, and then double check their placement once again. And then once I've got them where I want them, I trace where the first wing will attach to the pot. I'm careful to make sure a large part of the wing will be slipped and scored onto the pot. In the end, less than a quarter of my wing will be attached to the pot. If you are a beginner, it's a good idea to have a larger attachment area. If I was a beginner, I would make sure at least half, if not all of the wing was scored down onto the pot. Same things with anything like ears or horns. If you're a beginner, make sure that the placement of your features is mostly attached to the pot to make it more stable. I'm not quite a beginner, so I go ahead and make a risky looking pot. Gotta be careful though. Once I attach my wings, I flip it over onto some foam and clean up the underside and make sure to squish away any seams. Take a second to notice that the majority of my wing is suspended in mid-air. If I do not support it, gravity will warp and crack my wing off before morning. To support the wing, I go to the widest point, the place farthest away from the body, and place a ball of clay beneath it, and then gently squeeze it upward until the wing is resting on top of it. If I let my wing set up with this support underneath it for a night or two, it should be able to support its own weight without cracking. And then I do the same thing on the other side, carefully keeping my craftsmanship as clean as possible. The more attached parts, the harder cleanup will become, and so I try to keep it as smooth and clean as I can as I go. And then I had a last minute idea. I decided to attach those little tusky looking feeler things on a fly's face. I use a rubber tip tool to smooth out my connections and rough areas. In some areas, I also use a clean, wet paintbrush to smooth areas out. I also decided to carve some details into my eyes with a ribbon tool. And then last up is the feet. Because I want them all to be equal, I roll out a coil and then cut 6 equal pieces. I roll and shape them into teardrop shapes. I try them out and decide they are too big. I tried slicing them through the middle horizontally, but that didn't look right either. So I cut off the tips and used those. I placed the left feet in place and then put water-based marker on the flat areas where they will attach. This made a mark on the bottom of my pot exactly where the feet will go. I score the pot and then score the wee feet and then attach them together with firm rocking pressure. Rock it back and forth until you feel it grip and become one. I use a wet paintbrush to clean up the excess slip and then do it all over again on the right side. While I've got my pot upside down, I clean up all my messy craftsmanship, excess slip, dents, cracks, gunky clay bits, fingernail piercings, whatever you got there, clean it on up. And then here's the finished final greenware pot. FYI, greenware is clay forms that have not been fired yet. That's greenware. Whenever you finish a project with lots of score slips scored on pieces like this one, it's a good idea to allow it to dry very slowly. Place a dry bag loosely over the top, secure 2 opposite sides, but then leave the other 2 sides open so air can get inside and slowly dry out your pinch pot. Check it every day, loosening the bag a little more until the surface begins to look chalky or dry. Then you can take the bag off completely, allowing it to become bone dry. Bone dry is when there's absolutely no more water in the clay. It's basically suspended dust. And now for my favorite part, let's check out some student animal pinch pots. Hooray! Remember my 2 tips of wisdom? Go easy on yourself. You're gonna make mistakes. It is okay. And number 2, you are the master of the clay. Don't be bossed around by some dirt. You're the one in control. I hope you guys learned something and were inspired to create. Happy day and happy pinch pots. Bye.